Good morning. It is the 14th day of January in the Lord's year 2020. I'm J. Michael McCoy, and this is the Tuesday edition of Max World Live here on webcast1live.com and, of course, KPOG, the Power of God Radio, 102.9 here in central Iowa. Welcome to a Tuesday. We have certainly dipped into the colder weather. Let's find out exactly what. Alexa, what's the weather for Des Moines for 7 days? She's not talking to me. Well, I'll just tell you what it's going to be then. It's going to be cold. And we're going to get some snow. A couple inches. And we'll all forget how to drive. Isn't that funny how we forget how to drive? I mean, there's people tearing up and down the freeway, going as fast as they possibly can go, without any grip underneath. And if they hit the wrong patch of ice, well, that's going to be a challenge. But anyway, that's what people do. It's okay. I understand. Last Friday and Saturday, I went to a funeral both days. Friday, I was unable to come in and do the show because I went to Larry Morris's funeral. Larry was a 70-year-old Bible brother of mine. And Larry would walk up to you in the middle of the most public places there are and say, "I'm going to pray with you right now." And then he'd just start praying with you. Sometimes he'd ask, "Is there anything you want prayed for?" But see, what he wasn't going to do, there's no way Larry was going to get put in a situation where the question would be asked and then I would, or you would, whoever, would turn him down. "No, I don't want prayer right now. I'm fine. You don't need to pray for me for nothing." Because Larry had advanced. If you listen to Frank in the afternoon on The View from a Pew, you know, Frank will tell you that all Christians are on some type of journey, and maybe somebody's at mile marker 1 and maybe somebody's at mile marker 10. They're still in. They still have Jesus in their lives, but some are further on. I don't know how far it goes. I mean, obviously now it's all the way because, you know, he's heading for glory. But if it was a scale of 1 to 10, Larry had 9.999, infinity, down pat. He was just a good guy. He was a great father and grandfather and husband. He was an attorney by trade, but then got into the financial markets and did well. And Larry would just pray with you. And the prayers were very comfortable. Now, some people are uncomfortable with having someone pray with them. If they're alone in a room, that's a little easier. But when you're in the middle of the worship center or the mall or wherever you are, and Larry puts his hand on your shoulder and begins to pray, you know what that feels like. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a Christian working into that. You know, if you're uncomfortable with public prayer, it's okay that you tell somebody that. That person should not be offended in any way, shape, or form. So that's what Larry did. Larry was a public prayer. Larry was an alpha guy. He was just an all-around great guy. Walked out of his house one day, slipped on his sidewalk, and he walked fine. I mean, he was in great physical health. Slipped on the cement, went down and broke 2 ribs, snapped them, and both of them pierced his lungs. He also hit his head, but there apparently was some type of hat on or something, and so they couldn't really see the big bump and everything that happened to him. Anyway, long story short, all his body parts started shutting down, and he passed away within 5 days. And this was a surprise. You know, Pastor Fritz Trost, who did the service, by the way, he did an exceptional job. He said at one point during the eulogy, he said, "I'm mad." And you could hear it in his voice. He said, "I'm mad. I wanted another 20 years with Larry, and I don't get it. And it's okay if you're sitting there being mad. You can be mad. You can want something for yourself like that. There's nothing wrong when somebody dies too young." I don't know what that means. I just said that, and I thought about what's too young. Anyway, unexpectedly, maybe. It's okay to be mad. Hopefully you're not mad at God. You're just mad because you know you're going to miss the things that you enjoyed about that person. I lost somebody over a year ago that I cared about very much. And every time I got in my car in the morning to go somewhere, I would usually call her. And so for several weeks after her death in December 20th of 2018, I would still get in my car, put my phone in its little cradle, and then I'd start dialing her number. And I wasn't mad at God because her nickname was Fargo. I wasn't mad at God because Fargo was gone. I envied Fargo. She was in glory. But I was mad that I couldn't talk to her because it screwed up my day. And so Fritz just made the comment that, you know, he was mad because he wanted another 20 years out of Larry. And, you know, the grandkids and you know, his wife, Sarah, they would have wonderful dinner parties, and they'd all be Jesus parties. And Sarah is an amazing cook, and Larry would be holding court, always talking about scriptural things, hardly ever talked about business outside of his office. Business was business, and that belonged there, and everything else was Jesus. And then afterwards, Pastor Trost had set up 2 or 3 or 4 people from his family and friends that came up during the reception. Is that fair to call that a reception? Where you go in and everybody eats in the big room and talks to each other at the church. And there were 5 or 6 people that got up and told Larry stories. And there were a couple people there that, you know, told Fritz that he too, or she too, was hurt, mad, angry that Larry was gone. I do want to congratulate Pastor Trost on something else, and he brought this up. He said, for those of you that think Larry, moments after his death, was walking to the arms of Jesus, understand that's not biblical. Larry's soul is asleep right now. And when Jesus comes back for the second coming, then his soul will be rejoined with a new body in the new Jerusalem, in the new earth. And as I understand the Bible, not religion, as I understand the Bible, that is a correct way to look at that. Oh, Grandma died today and she gained her wings. No, she didn't. She's a human. Angels get wings. Humans are right below God. We were formed in his own image. Image is a visual. Angels were created to serve God. So if Grandma became an angel, there's something wrong here. Anyway, we put to rest Larry and his family, and I can't, he will literally be somebody that I miss on a Sunday morning when I'm at Hope and waiting for the service to start, and Larry would be, you know, glad handing and saying hello to people, and he was just awesome. Then on Saturday was the funeral for a friend of mine by the name of Ken Fusion. And Ken was, well, let me just tell you what John Carlson from the Des Moines Register said. Because Ken Fusion was a longtime Register employee. He was a writer. He was a feature writer. And he believes, John Carlson said he believes that he was by far the best writer that ever came out of the Des Moines Register newsroom. And coming from John Carlson, that's quite a thing. And I recalled when I first met Ken, and well, I guess I didn't meet him. I talked to him on the phone. See, when Ken would call, and you'd answer the phone, "Hi, it's Mac," and he'd say, "Ken Fusion with the Des Moines Register, how are you?" Your heart would just sink. It just sinks. You know, I get that very same feeling when I'm driving down the road and all of a sudden there are police lights right behind me and they want me to pull over. It's that empty stomach. My stomach drops to the ground. Hi, Mac. It's Ken Fusion from the Des Moines Register. How are you? And I got a call one day from Ken Fusion. This was around the, some of you will remember this, some of you won't, but we owned a nightclub. Pat and I owned a club years ago called Graffitis. And it was where the old Guitars and Cadillacs was. And when we moved the country dance venue to the new facility called Miss Kitty's, we converted the old location because we still owned the building. And we converted it to a place called Graffitis, which was a urban club. And one night, Valentine's night of, I think it was 2001, I'm pretty sure. Maybe it was 202. A gentleman walked into the facility, and my security people thought that he was selling drugs, and that's just an absolute no-no in our places, anywhere. And they asked him to leave, and he left. And when he came back in, he wasn't supposed to come back in, but he came back in and he popped one of the security guys, and the security guy took him down. And by the time the 911 was called, and by the time the police came, the subject, his name was Charles Lovelady, had expired. He died. And I could sit here and do hours and hours and hours talking to you about racism firsthand. Because it's not that I didn't see race. It's not that I'm colorblind. I certainly can see that someone has blonde hair or red hair or white hair or different colored skin. But I just never saw people differently. I don't label them because of the color of their skin. If they act a certain way, then, you know, you slap a label on them. And maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. I don't know. But, you know, they act a certain way and you slap a label on them. People do it to me. I stopped cutting my hair a couple of years ago, and I now have a fairly lengthy ponytail. Very rarely do I wear it out, but in other words, wear it out of the braid. But somebody could label me. You know, they could call me an old hippie, or I'm not a very business-oriented person anymore, because who would want to do business? Who would want to hire somebody who's 60 years old and has a pure white ponytail down to the middle of his back? So we do label people. And I don't know if labeling's good or bad. I try not to do it derogatorily. If you earn, let me think here. All right, so one of my favorite, well, it's actually one of my least favorite, but it's something I point out, is when someone gets information from an unreliable source and they don't back it up, they don't get another source, somebody just put it on Facebook and therefore it must be true. If those people start spreading that rumor, that gossip, and it's not true, or they don't have all the pieces of the puzzle put together yet, I call them low information voters. You know, it's like this meme that's going around right now that they've counted the number of times that President Trump has lied. Come on. And it's like 13,000 in 3 years. I mean, somebody do the math, would you? Take 365 days. Here, I'll get mine out because you might not do this. Well, it doesn't matter. But 13,000, that's just, you know, he must lie in his sleep because the math doesn't work out. And when somebody puts that up on Facebook, I say, well, you're a low information voter. You don't know what you're talking about. And that takes away a lot of credibility. Now, somebody might say that I'm labeling them a low information voter. Some might say I'm calling them a name. I think calling somebody a low information voter when they post something or they say something that they don't have the details on, I don't think that's a bad name. I think that's an accurate name. But I digress. It was assumed by all of the media, and the media frenzy around the Charles Lovelady death was something else. If you lived here in town, you know what I'm talking about. You can Google him. It is one of the most difficult things we've ever had to face as a company. Because no matter what we said to defend ourselves, to try to even show there's another side to this whole story, no matter what we'd say, the other side would simply say, yeah, but somebody died. Well, that's okay, you know. Whether he was selling drugs or not in the club doesn't matter, Mac, because he died. And I believe that's a fairly powerful response. Yeah, but he died. And the fact that that young man died in our facility was life-changing. We had first of all, we had to close. There was no way that facility was going to be allowed to stay open. At the time, we figured we lost about $600,000. So the facility is just sitting there. Since that's been torn down, Unity Point bought it, and it's now a health clinic, which is a much better improvement over what we had there. So you're closed. And the media, you think the media is bad today? It was as bad then as it is today when it comes to racism. You remember the gentleman that was shot and killed down in St. Louis? Marshall? Was it Marshall? Something like that? I mean, it's undone. It's absolutely undone. And there really isn't a way to defend that because, as they all said, somebody died. Well, somewhere along the way, somebody decided that he had a hoodie on and that he had it up and around his face and tied, and that we kicked him out because he wasn't allowed to wear a hoodie. So then the big deal was the dress codes and who was allowed in a facility and who wasn't. And I can remember Erin Moody. Her name was Erin Moody at the time. She was on Channel 8, not 13. She decided to go out and kind of test the clubs with a clothing barrier, dress code. And the club that happened to pass it high with no issues was another one of the clubs that we owned. But that was never in the story. And I don't, Erin's a good reporter. I don't hold her for that. But I have a chapter in the book, and hopefully you'll get a chance to read it, and it's just called Racism. But, we had things spray painted on garages and buildings. We had marches that would march from downtown to out here. We had an African-American mayor at the time. We had Akeo Samad. By the way, Akeo Samad was awesome. And I'm just telling you right now, he kept everything in check. That man is worth his weight in gold. He's a good man. The hardest thing, of course, for us was the fact that our two security guys were going to get charged with second-degree manslaughter. And these were high school football players. These were both Drake football players. And so we first had to go through the trial to try to show that they did not do anything wrong. But it's kind of hard when, the guy walks in and he pops one of them, and the guy takes him to the ground, puts his knee in his back, holds his face down, and 1 minute later he's not breathing. I mean, what would you think? I'd think the same thing. Knowing the truth during that was really hard. We knew what had caused that death. We were told through the county coroner's office what he died of. But we were asked not to disclose that. The court would do that. The prosecution and defense would worry that with the judge. And it wasn't our place to throw that around. So we sat from February to, I don't know what it was, September, knowing what had caused the death of that young man. What had caused the death of that young man is he had taken cigarettes and dipped them in formaldehyde. Yes, formaldehyde. Let them dry, and then he'd smoke them, and that gave you a very particular high. And it also froze your lungs. It immediately froze your lungs. The thing that gave you such a high is your lungs couldn't bring in outside oxygen, and so all you were breathing in was this formaldehyde, and this made you very high. Well, when the trial came around, the first witness that was called for the defense was the county coroner, and the trial was over in less than a half a day, found not guilty. Prior to that moment of the judge banging the gavel and saying not guilty, it was a free pass for the press. Two white football players from Drake, owned by a couple of white middle-aged guys. Charles was a good athlete in high school at Valley High, and of course, we have a habit in this country that when someone passes away, we lift them up into all their glory for what they have done in their lives. And we ended up meeting Lamont, his dad, and his mother. I think her name was Joyce. They actually came into the club a couple times, and they weren't mad at us. They didn't feel like they just weren't mad. The black community seemed to be understanding of what might have happened there. Maybe it isn't what it looks like. Maybe it isn't a white guy taking a black guy down to the ground and holding him down and he can't breathe, so he suffocates. But that's what the news media wanted to turn it into. Just like, the news media loves to pick on our current president, or love to pick on East St. Louis when that went down. That shooting down there, they're still talking about that rioting. But I digress. So I pick up the phone, and it's, "Hi, this is Ken Fusen from the Des Moines Register. How are you?" And I just wanted to hang up. I mean, I really did. Because do you know how many barrels of ink I own? I mean, just take a guess. How many barrels of ink did I own that I could defend whatever I felt needed defending? Because the Register and Mr. Fusion had endless barrels of oil. I'll never forget our attorney, Cutmus, Bill Cutmus. For those of you that know Bill or remember Bill, Bill's a fiery little guy. And he was the one that told us that one day. How many barrels of ink do you own? Oh, so you don't own any. Well, what are you going to argue with them for? They own all the ink. And so Ken already had his angle on the story. And as nice as I tried to be during the interview, he wanted to come meet me somewhere and sit down. And I said, I really don't want that, because then that gets pictures in the paper, and I got a business to run and a family to take care of. I'll be glad to talk to you on the phone. Well, that wasn't the circumstances in which Ken was the most comfortable, and so I already had something going against me right then and there. And see, Ken was brilliant. Ken really was that good. I think somebody else at the funeral said that if there was a Mount Rushmore of journalists, you'd have Woodward and you'd have this person and Walter Cronkite, and there better be Ken Fusion's face on that. Just a side note, if you Google him, his obituary, which he wrote, which was about 3,000 words, that's a big obituary. I mean, it's half a page. It went viral. People magazine picked it up. It'll be in their next issue. The Today Show picked it up. It was just wonderfully written. And guess who wrote it? Ken did. I remember the interview on the phone with Ken, and I remember the thing that made me the most uncomfortable, or I'd even say made me angry. He deserves that. He made me angry. I should not have gotten angry. I should have kept my cool, but you know me. He started talking about the color thing. How many, at the time we had 4 facilities open, I think. And how many black employees did we have? And my answer was, well, I don't know. I don't know. Well, why don't you know? Don't you think it's important in this? And then he began to preach. In this day and age with race being so delicate, don't you think that you should know if you have the same percentage of blacks working for you that lives in the city, the census type of thing? And I don't remember how it ended. The interview. I didn't hang up on him, but I might have made an excuse that I needed to go. And so when that article was written, rather than it being written about what happened to whom, it was all about me and my family, and that I was not sensitive to color, and just all these things. Excuse me, I needed to get a little drink. So, fast forward ahead to a Wednesday morning, 6:30 a.m., Lutheran Church of Hope Chapel, and this was about 9 years ago. And we were just getting ready to start men's Bible study, and in walks Ken Fusion. And he said, "Hi, my name's Ken." He said, "Do you mind if I sit in on your Bible study?" Well, I had already been told by the powers to be that this reporter was going to do a piece on Des Moines megachurch, Lutheran Church of Hope. And it didn't, nobody got excited about that because we really felt that it was going to be negative press. And as hard as you work to build a church that does the exceptional job that most churches do, if somebody's looking for the mousetrap and the blood and the guts and the beer, they'll find it. They'll find, it's the camel putting his nose under the tent. And again, remember that Ken was a journalist. Ken wrote several books. Ken was not a who, what, when, where, and why. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. He wasn't a reporter. He was a journalist. And there is a distinctive difference. And then Ken said, "Hi, I'm Ken, and I'd like to sit in on your men's Bible study." Sure, that's fine. I remember Fritz and I looked at each other because we knew that this guy was doing a piece on the church. And he said, "Oh, by the way, I am doing an article about hope on for the newspaper." And actually, I don't think it was for the Register. I think it was for Des Moines City Magazine at that time. So Ken joined us, and afterwards, after that first one, he walked up to me and he said, "You probably don't like me very much." And I took a breath and was about to say something, and he just looked at me square in the face and he said, "And I don't really care what you think." And for whatever reason, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about all the turns that conversation at that point could have taken. "I bet you don't like me very much." And I didn't get to say anything. He said, "But I don't care. I don't care." That could have gone to fisticuffs, blows. That could have been ugly inside of a chapel at church. The things that the press said about our organization during that time was just horrible. It was just horrible. And quite frankly, we were very lucky, blessed, whatever term you want to use, that we didn't lose our entire company at that point. We had 3 other locations open, and they could have shut them all down. It could have ruined us. And it was articles like the one that Ken Fusion wrote and other people within the Register. God rest his soul, this man and I ended up being brothers before he finally passed on, but Rob Borsellino was just horrible to us. And that's because there was a private meeting between some black community leaders and myself and Pat. And when we walked in, Borsellino was in there. And I said, "I'm not going to do this interview. I'm not going to have this conversation if he's sitting in here. I'm just not going to do it." And so Matt made another enemy. I'm pretty good at that. Now let's forget for a moment about graffitis and Charles Lovelady and the horrible tragedy that happened at that club that day. Let's forget about the article that Ken wrote. I want to talk about Ken. And what I'm going to tell you is public knowledge. It was part of his eulogy. He wanted to make sure that people knew that part of Ken Fusion was a gambler. I mean, a hardcore horse racing gambler. And he had been clean from gambling probably 3 years, 2 to 3 years when he walked into that Bible study, maybe 2 years. And the Register, after Ken had to leave the Register, he was let go from the Register. The Register made it public that he had gambling issues, and they began to feel that maybe his work would become compromised because he did owe people money. When you have a gambling problem, it doesn't mean you sit in front of the slot machine at Prairie Meadows and lose $20 in pennies. When you have a gambling problem, you're constantly chasing the tail of the tiger. If you have a good weekend and you do well, you should probably pay off your bookie. You probably should pay back the money that you borrowed that put you in that position, but that's not a way a gambler's mind thinks. A gambler's mind, at the point in which he wins a little, he's going to take that money and he's going to double up. And at the point in which a gambler's mind loses money, he's going to go to everybody he knows and put on that wonderful face that every gambler can and say, "Can you loan me $20? I can't pay my rent." His family didn't have much to do with him at that time. The register had let him go. It was hard for him to find a job. No health insurance. But Ken wanted everybody to know what his character defect was. And the one thing that Ken and I talked about quite often over the next 8 years was how we both were men who felt that because of the position in public that we were able to hold, I'm a radio guy, he's a journalist, that there was no anonymous in Gamblers Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. There wasn't any. That we didn't get to be anonymous. I mean, if he walked into a gamblers meeting, because he used to have a column and his picture was right there, like John Carlson's was and Rob Borsellino, and you see other people who are columnists, Reka Besu. So we couldn't be anonymous. And so rather than just getting angry or allowing our addiction to take the best of us, we had to live in the public view as an alcoholic or as a gambler or as a whatever it was. And the moment he said that, I'm going to back up for just a second. I apologize. But the moment he said that to me, that he said, "I don't really care what you think," we both started to laugh. I don't know why. I guess because, well, maybe I do know why. Holy Spirit was present. We were inside the chapel of church. And we just both started to laugh. We just thought that was funny. I think there was that moment in time when we realized that it really could have gone the other way and it wouldn't have been good for anybody. So Ken and I stayed close until he passed away. The amazing thing that happened, and Ken later admitted this, he was going to do a chop piece on hope. He wasn't a man who had Jesus in his life. He wasn't a church-going guy. He was an earthly, fleshy, do what I got to do to win kind of guy. And he admitted later, probably about a year later, maybe a year and a half later, that his intention was to come in and do a chop piece. You know what I mean by a chop piece. He was just going to rip hope to thread. This is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Mega church, mega church, mega church. Let the labels fly. But God had a different idea. Because from the moment that he walked in, Ken would later share with me that even that first morning in that Bible study, as hard as he wanted to write notes of negative things, the Holy Spirit kept having him write good things. Men who love each other. Men who tell each other they love them. Men who hug. Men who were transparent. Men who were there for another man even at 3 o'clock in the morning. Men could bond just like women could. And we could be transparent. We could be there for each other. And that's what he began to discover. And little by little, the hound of heaven chased Ken Fusion down. And one day during the Alpha Holy Spirit retreat, he just gave his life to Jesus. And he said, "God, I'm yours. Take me. I'm yours." And so God did. And for the next 7 years or whatever it was, Ken volunteered in every single thing he could at Hope. He volunteered to help teach Alpha, lead Alpha. He volunteered to work in the kitchen and do dishes. He didn't need to be the front of the house. He didn't need to speak publicly about what was going on. But if you know Mike, he did. Because Mike had him up there. And he shared the gospel. Ken's gospel. How Jesus came and got him. And how it changed everything in his life. And it was so interesting. I think there were 5 people that gave like 3 or 4 minute eulogies at his funeral on Saturday. And most of them, or all of them, they were all secular people. No, one. So 4 of the 5 were secular people. The last one, Lane, was his Alpha instructor, and he spoke about the Ken that he knew inside the church. But the other 4 people during the eulogy said things like, yeah, we didn't know what happened to Ken. Ken kind of got Jesus or found religion or fell in love with the church or drank the Kool-Aid or whatever term that secular person wanted to use. They saw a difference in their fellow journalist, their fellow workmate, that Jesus was doing something in this man's life. And Ken would tell everybody that he loved Jesus and that Jesus had changed him. And Ken and I'd sit down. I remember one day we sat down at my townhouse, and we both we wanted to try to figure out this Holy Spirit thing. And so we went at it as journalists. And we did it on purpose. As journalists, let's figure out how to explain this Holy Spirit. You can't. The only thing we could come up with was personal relationship with Jesus. Ken died of cirrhosis of the liver. I believe it was on the 3rd of December at the University of Nebraska Medical Centers. He was on the list for a transplant. I got tested. It wasn't a good match. I know there were another 6, 8 guys in the Bible study. They got tested. No, nothing was a match. And at age 63, Ken Fusion succumbed to a septic body, which all the organs were shutting down, and he died. Now, I know I'll see Ken again. There's no doubt in my mind. We used to joke. Here you go. Here's a little insight for you. We used to joke that Jesus would hold press conferences. And what would you say to Jesus at the first press conference? And imagine, the White House briefing room. That's what we pictured. Excuse me, Jesus, Lord, Christ, a question. And Jesus would say, all right, Ken, Des Moines Register, your question. And Ken always thought the first thing he'd say to Jesus was, bet you're surprised to see me. And anybody who knew Ken over the last 8 years knew that Jesus said, no, Ken, you've been on my sights for a long time. It was a good day. His son got up and talked a little bit. His children were there, his grandchildren, friends. His dad was there. I think his mom passed. He did his mom's eulogy, in fact, just a few years ago. And Pastor Mike did a bang-up job as always. But when you've got a front row seat to somebody's road to Damascus experience, you hang on to it. You look for it. It's like playing Clue. you look where God shows up that nobody else saw. And to watch Ken, and he and I were only a year apart. I got mugged by Jesus a year before he did. So by the time it was the fourth and the fifth year, we were even. So we were just like a couple of Boy Scouts wandering through the forest looking for bear tracks. And bear tracks where Jesus showed up. Every once in a while, you get to watch that. You get to see it. And I think it's in front of us all the time. You know, if you ever meet me, ask me for a 6-page business card, because I have 6-page business cards. And that's because they're filled with Macisms. And Macism number 3 is my favorite, and it is, coincidence is God's way of revealing himself. And I know that part of my walk with Christ is to see where he shows up. Could that have been him? Was that him at Hardee's the other day when I didn't have enough money to pay for my hamburger and the guy behind me said, oh, here, let me throw $1 in? Was that the woman the other day when I was at Hy-Vee and saw my shirt that I had KPOG on my shirt? She said, oh, I listened to your station. And I had a bag of apples and some asparagus. And she said, let me pay for that. I said, no. She said, no, let me. She said, I like what you do. I listen to you. My radar's going to be on the rest of my life, looking for God shows up. And I'm not going to look for him in the big things. I mean, not that God doesn't show up in the big things. Of course he does. But he also shows up for the little things. Like that guy who walked up to Craig and I in Jerusalem that Christmas Eve and said, you are forgiven. To this day, Craig and I wonder if that was Jesus. Did Jesus just show up for 8 seconds? A bull ride? Looking like a Jewish man who probably didn't weigh 100 pounds wet and had all the dreads and dreidels and all the things that I'm not trying to disrespect people with. I'm sorry, I don't know the names. Am I going to see Jesus today? Am I going to walk in a building and Jesus will open the door for me and he'll say something? Because the sheep knows his voice. Remember that. If you're one of Jesus' sheep, and I hope you are, you know his voice. You know his signature. You know when it's him and not somebody fake or somebody else. I will forevermore miss Ken. He was a good guy. He was a great man. And he really, really, really did love Jesus. So if you get a chance, Google Ken Fusion, read his obituary, remember that he wrote it. And I love the second line. I can't believe you people are going on without me. You know, Ken Fusion died on this date, da-da-da-da. I can't believe you guys are going on with life without me. That's Ken. That's Ken. All right. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it. It feels good when I can use the medium that I love the most, and that's radio or webcasting with pictures and everything like that. It makes me feel good when I can eulogize someone just personally, quietly, just me and you. No crowds, no microphones. Well, microphone, but no amplified, not a big room, not looking at 1,000 faces. Feels good. So here's a challenge for you today. I want you to play reporter for just a minute. and you're in the heaven's press room, and Jesus calls on you to ask a question. What would your question be? What would you ask Jesus if you could ask him? Now you're there, so you know the second coming has come. The new earth, you're got a new body. You know the answers to a lot of the questions that are asked because they're not being asked. When are you coming back? I'm here. Oh, okay. But what would you ask Jesus? What would you say to him? Now remember, you're in a press briefing, so this isn't mutual admiration time. You got to ask him the question. What's the question you'd ask Jesus? You think about that. We'll talk about it again soon. I'm J. Michael McCoy. If I haven't told you lately, thanks for listening. I love this job, and I couldn't do it without you. Right here on the Power of God. KPOG Grimes, West Des Moines, and of course, live on webcast1live.com.